Good afternoon and welcome to today's Emergency Housing Vouchers office hours. We are glad to have you with us for this next installment of office hours. Hopefully you're in the right place. There are still just a few people joining, but we will go ahead and get started. So just a few logistics for you. This session is being recorded and will be shared on the EHV website. Everyone is muted, but if you are having problems with your computer audio, you can call in using the information on the screen or in the chat. We ask that you submit your questions in the Q&A box, and if you're having technical issues, you can also put those questions in the Q&A box. Today's office hours are focused on portability, with our target audience being continuums of care, public housing agencies, victim service providers, and other partners. And the purpose is for us to share information and provide you with an opportunity to ask EHV-related questions to HUD. Again, today's focus is portability in the Emergency Housing Voucher program. But if you are a person experiencing homelessness and in need of assistance, you can use the link on the slide deck. And I think we'll also put that in the chat where you can search for assistance in your area. So our agenda today, we'll just start off with welcome and introductions. We will get a overview of portability requirements and scenarios in the EHV program. We'll also have a community presentation highlighting a regional partnership related to porting, and then end with a Q&A session with HUD. So today you are joined with a host of speakers and resource advisors from HUD, specifically the Office of Public and Indian Housing and the Office of Special Needs Assistance. And then TAC is here to support the office hours as well. Today's speakers include Emily Warren, Voucher Program Specialist with HUD, Corliss Alston, Senior Vice President of the Housing Choice Voucher Program with the Housing Authority of Baltimore City, and Marcia Parham Green, Executive Director of Baltimore County Office of Housing, Department of Housing and Community Development. So we have a couple poll questions for you before we get started. Laura, if you don't mind to bring those up. So where are you in the MOU process? You have your MOU in place, it's currently being negotiated, you're awaiting execution, or there is no movement. Once you answer that question, if you answer that you have no MOU in place, what are your barriers? And I believe you can select more than one response here. So maybe there's been just difficulties scheduling this discussions, no response from partners, disagreement on content, or other. So I'll give everyone a minute to answer those poll questions. And here we go with the results. So what is great to see, since it's July 20th, that 41% of you have an MOU in place. 25% are still negotiating, with 27 awaiting execution, and just 6% with no movement. So those that had no movement are largely reporting disagreement on content, and then in a tie for no response from partners are difficulties scheduling discussions. So hopefully we can continue to see movement with those MOUs, but you should reach out if you're having problems. If we can go to the next slide. And I will turn it over to Emily now.
Thanks, Nicole. So before we hear from our PHA presenters today, I'm going to review some basics on what portability is and how it's different for the EHV program. And first, to start at the very beginning, for those who may be less familiar with porting, what does portability mean? Well, under the Housing Choice Voucher program, the housing subsidy is tied to the family and not the unit, since HCV is tenant-based assistance, as is EHV. And because of that, a family can move with continued assistance, and that can occur both inside and outside the jurisdiction of the PHA that initially issued the voucher. Families are eligible to move under portability as long as the move is not in violation of the lease, with some exceptions, and as long as the move complies with the PHA's policies on porting. Next slide. Now, what are the PHA's policies on porting? Well, one aspect that's important for EHV has to do with what's called a non-resident applicant. If neither the household head or spouse of an assisted family already had a legal residence in the jurisdiction of the PHA at the time the family first submitted an application for the program, the family is considered a non-resident applicant. And under HCV rules, the initial PHA may choose to allow portability during the first 12 months for a non-resident applicant, but is not required to do so. If a family chooses to port, there are different ways the initial PHA and the receiving PHA can work out the financial aspects of porting, and we'll talk about that more in just a minute. Next slide. Okay, so now portability under EHV. To help maximize housing choice for EHV participants, HUD has waived the statute and regulations regarding restrictions on porting for non-resident applicants, and PHAs may not restrict an EHV family from exercising portability because they are a non-resident applicant, allowing all EHV families to immediately move under portability. Please note that while PHAs may restrict portability for non-resident applicants, please note that while PHAs may not restrict portability for non-resident applicants and may not apply any residency preference to EHV applicants, CoCs may choose to use an existing residency requirement to direct EHV resources to their community. And they may do so as long as the requirement is part of a needs-based coordinated entry system and complies with fair housing requirements. Next slide. And under EHV, the receiving PHA cannot refuse to assist an incoming EHV family, regardless of whether the PHA does or does not currently administer EHVs. If the receiving PHA currently administers EHVs, they may absorb the family with an EHV if it has an EHV available, or bill the initial PHA if it does not have an EHV available. And we'll talk more about these possible scenarios in just a moment. Next slide. And regardless of whether the receiving PHA absorbs or bills, the receiving PHA should administer the EHV in accordance with their EHV policies. And neighboring PHAs are strongly encouraged to work together to align EHV policies to help facilitate EHV portability moves. And we'll be hearing shortly from Baltimore City and County about the policies they worked to align to make it easier for families to port within the Baltimore metro region. Next slide. Now, if the receiving PHA does not administer EHVs, it may absorb the family into its regular EHV program or bill the initial PHA. Each family's oral briefing must include information about portability rules within EHV and how portability may impact EHV services and assistance. Next slide. The initial PHA and receiving PHA should coordinate on EHV services to ensure that there is no duplication of EHV services and assistance. And please note that services fees are earned once per voucher. Next slide. Okay, this is a little smaller than I had hoped, but I will just go over it briefly, this table. So these are the three possible scenarios. Let me make it bigger on my screen. And so in the first scenario, the receiving PHA administers EHVs and they have an EHV available. And so they can absorb absorb into EHV or bill. And when billing, the initial PHA must promptly reimburse the receiving PHA for full amount of HAP. And in regards to the services fee, the receiving PHA may use its own services fee and be reimbursed by the initial PHA, or the initial PHA may provide the services funding upfront. If the receiving PHA will provide services, there is a $1,750 cap unless the PHAs mutually agree to change the cap. For admin fees, when billing, the initial PHA must promptly reimburse the receiving PHA for the lesser of 80% of the initial PHA's EHV admin fee or 100% of the receiving PHA's EHV admin fee. For placement and the issuance reporting fee, if the lease sub qualifies for the placement fee and the issuance reporting fee, the receiving PHA receives the full amount. The receiving PHA is eligible regardless of billing or absorbing. The initial PHA qualifies for the issuance reporting of the placement fee as applicable. For the preliminary fee, the entire preliminary fee is always paid to and retained by the initial PHA and is not impacted by an EHV portability move. In the second scenario, the receiving PHA administers EHVs, but they do not have one available. They must bill, they cannot absorb into EHV, and all of the other scenarios for the other fees are the same. In the third scenario, the receiving PHA does not administer EHVs. Therefore, they don't have any available. They can bill or absorb into HCV. And note for the services fee, the initial PHA must provide the services funding upfront to the receiving PHA. And I see that Liz has put a link in the chat to the HCV guidebook, which has some additional details about porting. And so I will stop there and turn it back over to Liz. I'm sorry, to Nicole.
Thanks, Emily. I will actually now turn it over to Marcia and Corliss to share about their portability agreement.
Thank you so much. This is Marcia Parham Green, and it's a pleasure to be here today. And I'm going to kind of talk about what Emily has already talked about, the wonderful collaboration that is happening in the Baltimore region. It's the Baltimore Area Portability Cooperation. Next slide, please. So we have 6 housing authorities that are participating in this initiative. It's the Housing Authority of Baltimore City, Housing Authority, the Office of Housing for Baltimore County, the City of Annapolis Housing Authority, Anne Arundel County, Harford County, and Howard County Housing Commission. We all got together many years ago to tackle this problem with porting from jurisdiction to jurisdiction and the disparities that were occurring within the different jurisdictions. You would go, a couple of miles down the road, you'd be in a new jurisdiction and the rules were all different. So we thought, let's collaborate and see how we can make this easier for participants that tend to gravitate to other jurisdictions within the region to make it easier for them. And next slide. So this is a map of our region, and as you can see, we're all connected with Baltimore City being the hub of the region, and they actually host the largest housing program, the largest voucher program, and Baltimore County being the second largest voucher program in the area. So it was very important that we be a part of that collaborative, because we did have the most people going out to the other jurisdictions. And so again, I've already given you the names, but again, you can see how close we are. Next slide, please. The reason for us coming together, one of the big drivers was the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice from 2012. And it called for us to streamline the voucher portability within the region. Again, to make it easier for the participants. It was always about the participants, not about the housing authorities. We collaborated with the Baltimore Metropolitan Council, who got us all together, working with Dan Pontius, who is the policy coordinator. And we funded that position through a Sustainable Communities grant. And now, to keep the momentum going, the PHAs within the region fund his salary so that we continue collaboration on these works. So we started having those conversations in 2013, and I will turn it over to Corliss so Corliss can give you all the gory details of how we managed to pull that off. Next slide, please.
So good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Corliss Austin, and I'm from Baltimore City, the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. And I'm going to share with you the information about the agreement that we put together collaboratively. Well, let me go back a little bit. We meet monthly to discuss a variety of issues, and it could be the emergency housing vouchers may be the topic for our next August meeting, along with talking about the portability process. So in collaboration, we got together and created what we call the Porting Procedures and Standardization Form. And this is a form that identifies each of the housing authority's criteria. So we talked about all of our criteria, and the hope was that we would come to an agreement that when our participants ported to other jurisdictions, that they would have pretty much the same criteria, or if we weren't able to streamline that process so that they were the same, that our participants knew in advance that another jurisdiction's criminal background criteria may be a little more stringent than Baltimore City. So then we also looked at criminal backgrounds, we looked at eligibility requirements, we looked at income. We looked at our porting briefings, how frequently they were held, the criteria, the information that was in the booklet, and we looked at our contents and also the disparity of bedroom sizes, because what we found was that Baltimore City may say 2 persons to a bedroom. So based on gender and age, but another jurisdiction might just say 2 persons, not taking it into consideration. So we looked at all of that, put all that information together, and we compiled it into this porting booklet, which we present at our briefings, along with you'll see here it says a 2.5-minute video, which tells all the information about moving your voucher within the various counties or cities. And so it's a nice little pamphlet. It talks about us working together, the Fair Housing Group that has all of our contact information of who you should contact. It talks about the right to move, moving in the Baltimore region. It talks about bedroom sizes, the maximum per bedroom per person. It has information on the process, getting started, how you get started. So all of this information is included in the booklet that we pass out, all of our jurisdictions, we pass out during our briefing process. So maybe about 2 years ago, we decided that we would send a survey to all of our applicants and asking them, what is your preference? Where do you want to live? And early August, we're planning to send out another letter through SurveyMonkey to all of the 6 partnering agencies, voucher holders who have recently ported, to find out just what the barriers are, what did they like, did they learn anything? And this will help us to further our partnership and come up with, strategic streamlining processes to make this a seamless process within the different jurisdictions. The other thing that this partnership has done with us meeting monthly is, our colleagues, myself and Marcia and some of our other colleagues, we're able to talk about the best practices of just operating a voucher program along with the porting process and fair housing issues. So this is the last slide. And I guess at this time, Nicole, you can tell us if we're going to take questions or how you'd like to proceed. But here on this last slide, you'll see more information for contacting myself, Marcia, and Dan Pontius is really, he's the glue that keeps all of the housing authorities together, coordinates our agenda items, and all.
Awesome. Thanks, Corliss and Marcia. We do have a question about the portability booklet and if that can be shared.
Yes, I think it's in the chat. Liz put the information in the chat and you should be able to Google it. If not, if you would contact me, my information is up on the screen. I'll make sure you get a copy. Or all three of us, any of us can make sure you get that copy.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And I didn't see any other questions, Liz, unless I missed anything.
Not at this time, but that doesn't mean there might not be some later.
Awesome. Thank you. So now I will turn it over to Ryan for some Q&A with HUD.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Jones, the Director for the Voucher Management Operations Division at HUD. Before we jump into questions related to portability, I want to thank Corliss and Marcia for joining us and sharing the work in the Baltimore region. And I hope that participants will take the opportunity to ask questions about the great work that the Baltimore region is doing around the area of portability and ensuring that families can utilize the Housing Choice Voucher to meet the needs of their family. One of my favorite parts of these office hours is actually hearing from practitioners. So thank you for taking time to join today's office hours. Before jumping into questions, just a reminder to everyone that HUD maintains responses to frequently asked questions at the EHV website, which is hud.gov/EHV. And additionally, HUD continues to take questions at ehv@hud.gov. So I have a number of questions that we received around portability that I'll ask some of the HUD team to respond to, and then hopefully get to any questions that we have from our guests from the Baltimore region. So the first question I have is, we received is, does the fair market rent standard limitation used in porting apply to EHV billing? Mike Larisha, can you take that?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So if a receiving PHA that's receiving a port administers EHV, or if they are billing the initial PHA, in other words, this is operating as an EHV voucher, then all the alternate requirements and waivers that go with EHV apply, including the one which permits the use of 120% of FMR as the payment standard. Now, if it's a non-EHV housing authority administering this and it chooses to absorb and give the family a regular housing choice voucher, then that would not be the case. Then they would be playing by the normal HCV rules.
Great, thanks, Mike. Emily, Warren, I have a question for you. Are PHAs required to allow ports to a PHA who has a significantly higher fair market rent?
Yes, they would be required to do so following the different scenarios that I discussed earlier based on whether the receiving PHA administers EHVs and whether they have one available.
Thanks, Emily. Mike, I'm just going to apologize in advance. I don't mean to be picking on you with questions. So if others want to jump into any of these questions, please feel free. But this one is for you as well. Some PHAs may feel the waiver of the portability rule will put undue hardships on PHAs from small jurisdictions or with limited units. What is the alternative? A PHA has asked.
So I'm not completely certain what the hardship would be and what the waiver would be, but if it has to do with the major alternative requirement, which is that they cannot hold up a port from a non-resident family, they must let them port immediately. If that's the issue, the hardship related to that, I can only assume they might be considering would be the cost of the voucher maybe be more expensive. And if that's the case, HUD will, be able to make sure that they get enough funding to cover all their vouchers, particularly with EHV. If there's some other hardship I'm not aware of, you should contact us and we'll see if there's something we can do to point out a way to mitigate that.
Thanks, Mike. So again, if the person that asked this question wants to follow up with additional details or clarifications, please do so at ehv@hud.gov. Jerry Ann, I have a question for you. Can the EHV family port to a jurisdiction or that's covered or that has a PHA that administers the Housing Choice Voucher Program, but did not receive an allocation of EHV vouchers?
So yes, EHV follows most of the normal portability rules for the Housing Choice Voucher with a few alternative requirements, which are intended to be more permissive on moves. They're outlined in section 9.0 of the notice 2021-15, and all EHV families may immediately move under portability.
Thanks, Jerry Ann. So Mike, going back to you, will a PHA that did not get an EHV allocation have to take the ports? And if so, will their annual voucher allocation increase? Was a question from a PHA.
Okay, like all ports, PHAs have to accept them and have the choice of absorbing or billing in general. And so in this case, a non-EHV PHA would have to administer the voucher. They can choose to bill the EHV initiating PHA, or they can choose to absorb them into their regular voucher program. But in neither case would that change the size of their program in their ACC.
Thanks, Mike. And I may have another one for you. Let me know if it's not clear. We can always have we'll ask the PHA that requested this question come back to us with additional detail. But the question is, if the PHA is the receiving housing authority, the family porting is using an EHV, and the voucher is being absorbed, is this family reporting under EHV as long as the receiving housing authority has EHV's vouchers allocated to it?
Bob Bipley is welcome to weigh in here, but we have talked ahead of time on this one, so we're aware of it. And yeah, they would be reporting as EHV whenever they have an opportunity to report on the more particular identity of the property, like it's a program, as if it's VASH or something else. They would choose to report under the VASH line or the EHV line rather than a generic port paid. That way the information is used to assist them better in funding and other things.
Thanks, Mike. And I'll try to share the joy with Bob this time. When a PHA issues an EHV voucher and the family ports out and is administered by the receiving housing authority, is the voucher for the initial housing authority counted on the EHV leasing line item or the portable vouchers paid line item? This PHA is asking the question, is I think assuming the former, but is seeking confirmation.
For the initial PHA, the answer, the initial PHA needs to record the cost of the leasing. The receiving PHA would use the portable field to report their portion. That being the account, but the actual costs and everything need to be reported by the initial PHA so that when it comes time to provide additional money, et cetera, it can be provided to the initial PHA who then can send it to the other PHA based upon their billing.
And just to follow up on that question, I believe you alluded to this. So if the PHA is the receiving housing authority, the family porting in is using an EHV, and the family is in the, let's see, just let me clarify the question. And the voucher is administered by the receiving housing authority. The receiving housing authority reports this family under regular portable administered. Is that statement correct?
At this time, yes.
Thanks, Bob. Those were the portability questions I could identify. If the HUD team has identified other questions that came in that it would like to respond, portability or otherwise, I'll ask them to identify those questions. I'll give a brief pause to see if any of the HUD team that are on have identified other questions, and then ask our TA team to identify, lift up any questions that may have been identified for Carlos and Marcia. So, HUD team, is there other portability questions that you found that I didn't ask that you want to respond to?
Hi, this is April on the CPD side. We were, Jerry Ann and I were just conferring back and forth. We saw one question in the chat that related to how can COCs, we think it means, how can COCs be involved within this portability conversation, and how does portability really apply to COCs, to collaborative applicants in this process? So I think on the COC side, on the CPD side, I think this is where partnership can really play a key role in the process. If there are PHAs who you want to collaborate with in helping participants understand what's needed, fostering good communication, collaboration, even helping with educating participants, and even PHAs teaching COCs, well, this is what portability is about, this is what our expectations are, and things like that. I think that'll go a long way in kind of bridging the gap and understanding the program and helping the participants. I'm not sure if the PIH side had anything to weigh in on with that.
Not specifically PIH, but just to piggyback off of what you said, COCs can additionally help households to identify mainstream resources that may be available to them once they port to the new location. So if there are benefits that they qualify for, helping them to apply, helping them to get the information, helping them to know where to go to get the information would definitely be helpful to a household that is moving from one location to another.
Thanks, Jerry Ann and April. So I'll just give a moment. The HUD team has any other questions they have identified to lift up for today's audience.
This is Mike. I'm reading one in the chat here. Does a receiving non-EHV PHA have a responsibility to spend services fees only on approved services expenses? There's a longer question after that, but the answer is yes. The service fees can only be spent on the purposes for which it's been appropriated. So that is going to be the case.
Great, thanks, Mike. So at this time, I think we'll turn things back over. And again, if your question didn't get answered, we will be taking the questions that we received today, those answered, and those that weren't answered, including those unrelated to portability. And we'll go back to our frequently asked questions document to identify areas that we need to provide additional guidance as you as a community work to implement the emergency housing voucher. So thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Laura, if we could pull up that poll question, we have one more poll question for everyone before we wrap up. So following up with the conversation that Marcia and Corliss provided, maybe your PHA is doing something similar. So does your PHA have an existing agreement or plan to implement an agreement with neighboring PHAs related to portability policies and/or alignment of program policies such as screening criteria, payment standards, owner incentives? So you can answer yes, we have or will have such an agreement. Yes, we will align a portion of our policies. No, we don't have a plan to enter into any agreements. Unsure, still deciding. Okay, it looks like the majority of you are unsure or still deciding, which is totally fine. Hopefully you feel inspired by the presentation today. I do have a couple follow-up questions for Marcia and Corliss. As you all were having those discussions back in 2015, did the PHAs involved become more flexible, or did they reduce standards related to screening criteria, payment standards, anything like that?
So this is Marcia. So when in the very beginning, it was a difficult process to get to agreement because we did each have a different screening criteria. We all of our portability rules for background checks and all that, they were all different. Some range from 3 years to 5 years to 2 years. So what we did is we really took them one at a time and said, what makes sense? What can we live with and what can our boards live with that we can change? So once we said that we were going to make that agreement, we got to their agreement in short order. So some agencies had to reduce their background checks, some had to increase, but now it's the same across the region. So again, the participants will know what to expect when they get to that next jurisdiction. And also the landlords, if we're all doing it all the same, it really makes it easier for the landlords to understand how our programs work. So it was in our best interest to come into alignment.
Nice, thanks, Marcia. So it sounds like there weren't really any instances where any of the PHAs were unwilling to change your policy.
Absolutely not. There was not an instance of that.
That's amazing. So what advice on other partnership best practices would you give to this audience, given that I'm sure that was a lot of negotiating back and forth to get everyone to that point?
It was. It took us about 2 years to get to that point because at some points we got caught up in the minutia of the porting process. But then when we really took a look at it from a participant perspective, that gave us the momentum to push through. We are doing a partnership with project-based vouchers in the region. We all put in project-based vouchers into a pool so we can create affordable housing across the region, not just in our jurisdiction. So we are looking for anything that we can collaborate with to make the region to be the same as best possible.
Awesome. So what other benefits have you seen from coming to this level of agreement outside of ease of administration and ease of burden on the people actually being served?
So I'll start off. This is Corliss. One of the things I'll say is, we've established a support system so that we can come together, agree to disagree, and to look at the entire process. And as you're looking at what other jurisdictions are doing in terms of their criteria, their briefings and eligibility requirements on bedroom sizes, I think we learned a lot about just what it took to port. When you're given a briefing, you just say, oh, you can port to this jurisdiction, you need to do this and this. But sometimes it's a complicated process, and our voucher holders are kind of caught in that process. So I think it taught us a lot about the process, about the barriers that we needed to look at and streamline, and the camaraderie of just coming together to talk about how do you manage a voucher program, along with ensuring you're on the right track. So the support for me, I would say the best thing has probably been the support system, to be able to call my colleagues and ask the question. Like I called Marsha called me yesterday to ask me, hey, I need you to take a look at this. And I can call her at any time and ask for that same courtesy. So, that's something that has been extremely nice, the support system, and also learning what work best practices about what works with a smaller agency than a larger agency. So it's been a great partnership.
So good to hear. On that, or in that vein, have you already looked at the service fees and ways that you could come up with agreement across the PHAs that you're working with on how those service fees would be used or reimbursed and when it comes to portability? Are you all still working on that?
So I'm going to say we're still working on it. I did see in the HUD notice that it can't be more than $1,750. And, we've kind of mapped out what our relocation process is going to be, and how we're going to allocate those dollars. So I think all of us are still kind of working that out. We do meet monthly, as I said. So when we meet the first Thursday of August, that'll be one of the hot topics about how the services that everybody has decided to use. And then also, what kind of allocation are you going to have for each part of those fees? What service fees, what services are you going to provide? And then the allocation for each one.
Yeah, and additionally, we're having conversations with the CoCs to encourage them, because each jurisdiction has their own CoC. So we're encouraging in Baltimore County to reach out to Baltimore City, because we have a lot of porting between the two of us. I have approximately 1,500 ports, and a vast majority of them are from Baltimore City. And some from some of the other surrounding jurisdictions. But it would behoove us to make sure that the CoCs are connecting so that they can provide those services if the family chooses to port.
Thank you for that. And Corliss, I just want to add, the notice does mention that cap, but it also mentions unless the housing authorities agree to another amount. So I would say the partnership you all have is just setting you up in a great position to work through all those things. So I imagine you will have a lively discussion, like you said, in August.
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. Well, good luck to you all, and thank you so much for sharing, and thank you to HUD for answering all the questions today. Thank you everyone for attending today's office hours. Next week's office hours will be on reporting, so lots of good information to be shared then. As a reminder, your MOU deadline is July 31st, which is approaching rapidly. As always, you can submit your questions to ehv@hud.gov, and this office hour recording will be posted on the EHV website. Thank you all again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.